I think success for me, my friend, is the fact that I'm privileged enough with my background and story to even be here. Success for me is waking up every morning and having another day with my family and my kids. Not worrying about the little stuff where you fight and argue as a family about who didn't do the dishes or who went to or take the trash out. I'm blessed and lucky to be in a position where I get to enjoy those happy little faces.
What if catching COVID, COVID, you heard me say that. What if catching COVID became the miracle that killed your stage 4 cancer and unlocked $1 billion playbook for business growth? Well, today's guest lived that story. Welcome back to The Root of All Success. I am the real Jason Duncan. This is episode number 313, and my guest today is Marc Adams, international best-selling author of Secrets to 10Xing Your Business and Cashing Out Tax-Free. He's a strategy mentor and the man who's scaled companies from $140 million to $1 billion. He's built a $30 million revenue stream in Southeast Asia in just 18 months with no budget. And he flipped a money-losing $15 million subsidiary into a $140 million exit. But Marc's greatest victory wasn't financial. He was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, given 6 months to live, and had an unexpected bout with the original strain of COVID. And that wiped out his cancer and rewired how he defines success. We got a lot to talk about today with Marc Adams. Marc, welcome to the show.
Wow. Thank you so much for having me here. And what an amazing introduction. I damn well better live up to that billing, my friend.
Well, we are always enjoy hearing the accents from across the pond. I don't know if people on that side of the pond like hearing the American accent, but we enjoy hearing yours.
It's a mutual love affair.
That's good. All right. So, Marc, your doctors say that COVID killed your cancer. So, I'm going to ask you about the business lessons you learned from that, but I really want to dig in just out of curiosity. Like, really, COVID?
Yeah, it is a twist of fate. In as much as I got a diagnosis of stage 4, we were back in. If I take you back to 2020, in that first full lockdown year of the pandemic, in the UK where I was at the time, we have medical facilities that kind of you got the public hospitals that anybody can use for free, and then you got the private hospitals you can choose to pay for, and so my insurance covered me for some private hospitals. Hey, and I get and in that towards that end of 2020, we could go out in little groups, but all we had every day, if you remember, was the death stats on how many new people had died around the world, how many new infections there were. So in those little groups you could go out in, I was due some medical tests anyway. There was nothing wrong with me, but it was a bit of a shock when I went to have some tests and it came back with, you've got stage 4 and you've got 6 months to live. Now, there was no way that we decided to take it out, but the hope in taking it out was maybe I get a few more months. And if you're ever in that position, and I hope that nobody is, you would give anything for another day with your kids and your family and those people that you love. But while I was in hospital in January 2021, hospital actually in Windsor in England, for most people, when they think of Windsor, if they think of it at all, they'll think of Windsor Castle, where the Queen lived. Well, down at the bottom of the hill, there's a hospital there where my consultant, Mark Laniardo, was doing his thing. So after the diagnosis, they took me in to take the cancer out. Now, we did that in central London, in the same hospital that King Charles has recently been treated in, but not for the same condition. But while I was there, Jason, unfortunately, despite all the prep and all the planning and all the tests, I managed to get the original strain of COVID. And so you kind of feel robbed because you got 6 months and you do anything for another day. But in that original strain of COVID at that time, before the vaccines, all of us were going through a 28-day window. None of us knew where that was going to go. But we knew in the first 12 days it was going to get worse or you were going to get better. So I kind of felt, shit, excuse my language, I've gone from 6 months to a 12-day window that I've got to get through. And you start thinking 1 hour at a time as to what you're going to do. Now, roll forward to April, when I went back post-operation, I remember clear as day walking into Mark's office, and to the right, you've got a view over a car park. To the left, you've got all his accolades. And then you've got Mark behind his desk with a white coat on. And because of his age, he's got glasses that he looks over the top of, but just to see me, not because they're half glasses. And he kind of leans in and says, Mark, I've got good news and bad news. And I'm like, okay, so what's the good news? And he said, the good news is we can't find any of the cancer. And I went, well, okay, that's great news. But where's the bad news? He said, well, we don't know why. And I'm thinking, well, that's great. That's bad news for you, but that's really good news for me. What difference does that make? But it turns out that what they think was, it wasn't that COVID cured me and killed it. It's they think COVID pushed my immune system into overdrive. Now, back then, and now I'm pretty healthy anyway. I do spend a lot of time at a gym and I take supplements and things like that. But they think that I was in good condition going into the op. And COVID pushing my immune system into overdrive means that the immune system doesn't say, Jason, I'll deal with a cold and I'll leave COVID. It just deals with everything it possibly can. And COVID pushing it into overdrive, they think, pushed the immune system to then get rid of a whole bunch of secondary cancers that we knew were there because I lit up like a Christmas tree on a PET scan. So when he told me this, I'm saying, can we bottle this? We've got to get this out because this can cure everybody else. And he went, no, Mark, it doesn't work like that. But the reason he thought that was because around March, April 2021, you started to see in medical journals around the world the kinds of things that professionals saw, but you and I wouldn't see. Some people that were late stage cancer patients, not much, stage 4, didn't have a good prognosis or an outlook, weren't going to survive very long, but they'd got the original strain of COVID like me. And somehow they'd been, you can't say cured, but I'm going to say cured because what that actually means is you go into remission. Remission is a 5-year period. I'm just at the end of it now. And so, I'm somewhat privileged to even be here, to have the opportunity to have a very pleasant chat with you. And because by rights, I've got a second chance, and I feel in many respects I shouldn't be here, but I'm so grateful that I am. But that's the connection they think, and they still think that.
Yeah.
But I'm not exactly going to go back and say, well, give me back the cancer and give me the original strain and let's see if we can do it again. It's like there's nothing we can do to go back and test it. And they think they can't prove it. So I'm grateful and very privileged, and it's unbelievable. It's just a miracle.
Well, praise God for that. That is a great story. So what business lessons did you take from that about beating impossible odds?
Well, actually, in that journey, so post-operation, I'm recovering at home and I've got COVID and I don't know if I'm going to make it. So if you can imagine, our bedroom at home is a big just white bedroom. And to the right, I've got a view of beautiful English countryside and rolling hills. To the left, we've got a big dressing area which leads through to an ensuite. And in the corner, there's a door through which you enter and leave the bedroom. Now, every morning, when my youngest son, Thomas, who was then aged 10, would wake up, he'd come and check on Dad. But he couldn't come closer than the door because we were all in isolation. You couldn't get closer than 3 feet. And then he'd check on me mid-morning and afternoon, lunchtime, afternoon, tea time, and we'd chat. Now, keep in mind, all our kids, Jason, they were watching the same stats on the news that you and I saw. So a 10-year-old can't process this. All they see is death. But the other side of being in lockdown is the kids were in lockdown too, right? So what he's got is a year of Xbox. So it's like a holiday for him. So when he would come in, we'd chat about Xbox. But after a week or 6, 7, 8 days of this, I kind of run out of Xbox conversations because I don't know much about it. And he just happened to come in one evening to say goodnight when I took a call from a friend of mine in Los Angeles. And coming off that call, he then sort of said, how was the call? What was that about? And so we started talking about that. And one of the things I just glibly said was, it's such a shame that 9 out of 10 companies that come to market don't get sold. And I kind of said that because I'd run out of Xbox things to say. And so I was just clutching at something to say because I wanted to chat with him. But he said, it surprised me because what he said was, well, why? What happens? I said, well, oftentimes they're probably worth every penny to the owner, but the market won't pay the price they want. They're just a bit more expensive than the market will bear. And so he then said, well, what happens to them? But I didn't realize where he was going. And I said, well, they don't get sold unless they really reduce the price. And they can't really reduce the price because they need that money most of the time because they're going to retire and they need it for their retirement. I was particularly focused on one segment of the market at that time. So he says, well, what happens to the one? And I said, well, they get sold. And he said, well, why aren't you helping the 9? I said, well, what do you mean? Because in private equity, if it's not the right price, you walk on by. Very unemotional, not the right thing to do. And I feel embarrassed to even say that to you, knowing that that's what I used to be. But his line on that was, well, Dad, what happens if those 9 companies don't sell? And I'm saying they got to reduce the price. But what he means and then went on to say was, what happens if their mums and dads get COVID and they die and they didn't sell their companies? What happens to their families? Who's going to look after them? That's what he was thinking. That's what he said.
Wow.
So there was a big pause. I didn't have an answer, but I felt that I needed an answer. And all I could muster pathetically was, that's a good point. I don't really know. He said, well, what are you going to do? To which I didn't realize at the time, but that became a challenge or something to think about. Because the thing about my 10-year-old and probably many other 10-year-olds around the world is our kids don't forget. And so what I said to him was, I would look at it. So I don't know what the answer is, but we'd take a look at it. But I was focused at the time on beating COVID and then beating cancer. So when we got to April and I'd cleared it. So at the point that he was saying this to me, Jason, he didn't know I had cancer, but he knew I had COVID. We didn't tell the kids that I only had 6 months to live because there was just a glimmer of hope that you'd find a way to beat it, but you didn't know where that was going to come from. You were just believing in hope. And luckily for me, like a miracle, it worked out. But moving forward to March, April 21, and me picking up, if you like, the gift of an all clear, as it's turned out, we didn't know that at the time. He's reminding me of, because the sun never forgets. And so I started to think about, well, what would be the answer to that problem? And it took me a couple of years to figure it out. And so the biggest lesson from that was the pivotal change for me in the way that you could approach business. You see, in private equity, you're going to look to buy low, build it, add value to it, and sell high. And eventually, it dawned on me that if you worked with owners of businesses to improve the value of them, which you can do, and then help those owners position those businesses for sale in such a way that they didn't have to pay any tax, or if they couldn't do that, they minimized the tax, then you wouldn't make as much money as private equity makes, but you'd make an amazing living because you'd share in that with them. But they would be able to get where they needed to be and take care of their families and retire and do the things in life that they damn well should be doing and that they've absolutely earned the right to do. But it turns out that that's not just a problem for companies or owners of businesses who might be coming to their retirement years. This is a challenge for business owners of any age. And now I work with one person who's only 19. And he wants to be, his plan of what he wants to do is amazing. He wants to be a digital nomad. In his case, when he was 15, he had a big problem with drugs. His parents were pulling their hair out. They thought they were going to lose him. The police were amazing because they knew he was a good kid and it was a good family, but he pushed the limits with what he was doing to the point where it was going to be prison. And his parents got him out of the country for a 3-month window on a trip with his dad that changed everything because he was away from the bad influences that were getting him in trouble that he couldn't get away from. Now, fast forward, he's back on the right track, would never look at anything that's got, remotely to do with drugs or anything like that, which is obviously what it should have been, but not every kid is like that. But what he started to do is document this and put it down in a mini book, not for his peers, but for mums and dads of other parents that have got kids like that, because there's not many places you can go to get much help, certainly from anybody that's been through it, survived it, and sees it from a different perspective. But he's also going to use that as a digital product that he can sell. He'll make $1,000 a month. But while he's traveling, because he wants to do the travel bit around the world, as most young men and women of that age might want to do, it's going to be a bit of an income for him in his sleep. And this will provide a basis for him to build a business. I like to talk to people about 10x in the business and cashing out tax-free, but there's more to that, Jason. And the underlying thing is, why don't we, with intent and purpose, think about growing a business potentially from 0 to 100 million in value, and then position it to be sold tax-free, and then come back and help other people do it again. Now, the 100 million to some people will be a bridge that's so far out that they'd never even believe it would be possible. And to other people, it's a stepping stone to a billion, which they're going to do in 5 years, not 7 years or something like
Yeah.
that. And the problem with that statement, when you think 5 years or 7 years, is that most people want an instant shot in the arm, so it's too far out. So you kind of tune it. But what I've learned now didn't start then with the cancer, but it's all been progressing to. There is a better way to think with more intent and purpose when you start a business to get it to where you want to be in a fixed time frame and cash out of it tax free or tax minimized, and then go back and help other people do the same and make a lot of money all over again. Not as much money as doing it the first time, because you might only get 20% of the upside working with someone else to help them do it, but you're giving them 10x the value and you're saving them a bunch of money because they're helping to cash out tax free. So I want to be the smart person and say, Jason, oh, I thought this at the time and what an amazing revelation, but I'm not. In many respects, I'm just like anyone else out there. Things dawn on me because of the situation that I'm in, and you find that you've got a challenge or a problem that you've got to overcome. The biggest lesson is when you are dealing with cancer and COVID and you're looking an hour and ahead with COVID in that particular window. I was looking at YouTube finding, what do you do on day 3 with COVID? What do you do on day 4? How am I going to get through a day? So, and so when you go from that, everything else is a blessing and a bonus. And where I am now in that journey is, if I'd planned to be here, I would never have imagined a plan like this. Now, with intent and purpose, I know where I want to get, but I'm less concerned about the steps I'm going to take to get there that are not the next immediate steps that you need to take. I'm more intent with the purpose of getting there or working with business owners to get them to where they need to be, because life is going to throw challenges at you that you don't expect that will derail you. You've got to get up, dust yourself down, and move back in the general direction. And cancer is the biggest lesson to do that. You go from stage 4, and then COVID, which you think is going to potentially take you out in within 28 days because no vaccines were in. You take a different perspective on appreciation and life and goal setting and the intent and purpose of where you're going to get from how you get from where you are now to where you want to be, with a sense of urgency. Because I used to procrastinate. Now I'm grateful for every single day because I didn't have more than 12 at the lowest point. So you don't have to, when you've got 12 days and you're in that window on day 5 when my breathing was bad and I didn't think I was going to get there. And I remember saying to my wife, I'm fighting for every breath and I'm not giving this in. And I'm literally gasping. At that moment, you're trying to tell everybody in the world that you haven't told everything that you love or want to say to them, because you might not have them. That might be the last night that you've got. Now, it sounds a little dramatic, but the lesson from that is I've come through it. I'm grateful to be here. Now, a sense of purpose and getting shit done, as I like to call it, in moving towards achieving that goal is really important. And most business owners don't necessarily have that. We're going to go for a 50 million exit or a 20 million exit or a 100 million exit with a sense of purpose on how they are going to get there.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's a really clear thing.
Well, you scaled a company from 140 million to $1 billion valuation. So let me ask
Yep.
you, from a strategic standpoint, what was the very first strategic lever you pulled to make that happen?
People. I believe in people. In that particular business, it was before this cancer incident. So I've been in and around what I do for, well, it's nearly 4 decades, but I don't really want to say that, but certainly over 3 decades. In that particular situation, it was a company that was not doing very well. And so there had been a number of senior VP stroke CEO people in that business, and it had just been flatlining and declining. What most people in that I have found through my career when they go in is they're either very people centric and they'll spend a lot of time investing in the people, and getting to know them, because the people that are at the coal face of the business are the ones that are really going to tell you what's going on. The people in the ivory towers sometimes feel they know what's going on, but they miss out on what is actually happening. So it doesn't necessarily materially change the direction. Steve Jobs was brilliant at keeping in touch with what the customer wanted. Wasn't necessarily the best manager of people in some situations, but there's that, and that's understandable. But in that particular business, once I'd gotten to the people, by accident, I came across one individual that basically said to me, "So why would I talk to you? You're just another person coming in here to tell me what to do that doesn't know anything." And my answer was, "You're probably right, but I'd love to learn." And he gave me one or two things that had happened in his journey that made me start to think this was a business that sold a software product, and it sold it in volume at $3 a hit, when it should have been for one unit like 120, but by volume discounts you could get it for $3 a hit. But they never ever bothered to charge customers or collect the money from them, and people thought that was okay. Yeah, I know. I can see you shaking your head. Anybody that's listening, Jason is shaking his head. You wait till you hear the next bit. And the next bit was, I started looking at what volume of units, not cash, was going out the door. Nobody looked at that either. They just took it for granted. They looked at the numbers, the dollars. And when I looked at the volume in terms of units going out the door, it was in the millions. Millions. Instantly, I looked and thought, how do we ensure that customers pay the fair and appropriate price? And what kind of policies do we have to enforce that? Because they're basically stealing the software. There was nothing. So I started to carefully alienate myself from the board by accident, because I knew that the way to get this company to a significant valuation was to fix that. Because it was one of those where you had all the product out there, you just had to go and collect the cash. What I had to give thought to was how we were going to do that in a fair and equitable way and sustain it for multiple quarters, showing clear and consistent growth, combined with organic growth by signing new business. And then in the tech space, where multiples back then were typically 40 or 50, then you could start to see that going from 140 million to over $1 billion in value was very achievable. But in the end, when we got to that, I had a very greedy board, because I could fuel that and continue that without much more investment into the business for probably another 3 years, but they wanted it all now, because boards can sometimes be a little bit greedy and see the money going in their pockets and not necessarily what's good for customers and the company. And so we got it to that valuation, and I was there as a consultant taking that business forward. An advisor, senior level advisor, taking that business forward. And Jason, I just happened upon something that was there that everybody missed. Everybody missed. But with the right conversations, the strategy then formed, and it was a case of executing on it. And so it was amazing to see to pan out. And I had equity in that business, but of course it's a privately held company, so I didn't then have control on realizing that equity. So I've still got it, but it's not worth $1 billion anymore. So there's some lessons learned for people that might be listening today on that. If they want to know how to get around that, just hit me up and I'll tell them. So so that's kind of it's a case of putting the strategy in with minimal investment and going for this worldwide, and it just turned out to be the right thing to do at the right time. Customers were very supportive of it; they knew, and some customers even said, "We wondered if we would ever get a bill for this." But how you get into that position in the first place is like unbelievable.
Well, let's talk tax, because part of your unique perspective is how to exit tax free. So,
Yeah.
what's the biggest myth that owners believe about tax free exits, and how does that myth destroy valuations?
Well, that's a brilliant question. Oh my God. I could go on about this for hours. Okay. Let's start, if I may, with the problem. You're a business owner today. Your business is worth 10 million. No, let's not make it quite that valuable. Let's say your business is worth 5 million. You live in New York or you live in California. What business owners don't often realize, and the number one thing, if they're going to write anything down, if they happen to have pens and paper handy from this podcast, this is the bit that I want them to write down. And that is, when they sell the business in those two states, potentially over 50% of the money that's on its way to their bank account doesn't end up there.
That's
It
right.
ends up with 30% state, 40% state and federal. If you're using a broker and you'll need some legal services to construct, pull the contracts together and so on and so forth, and financial due diligence, if you're doing that, you could lose over 50% of the sticker price. The shame, the criminal shame, is that a lot of business owners don't realize this. So the bigger issue, so that's the really big issue. Now, so when I wrote the book, actually, quick diversion, it will come straight back onto topic. It got banned by Amazon. And I wrote the book myself. It took weeks, it took months to write the book. And then I'm self-published. And so I didn't have anybody referencing in it. I got copyright for it. It got banned. And I knew that I couldn't think of a reason why. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me. Could it be that the title of the book, Secrets to 10xing Your Business and Cashing Out Tax-Free, was a little bit much for Amazon, for Audible, for Kindle, or anyone else? Now, when I wrote to Amazon, having been banned, and said, please relist me, of course, they don't have to do, I'm just nobody, but they were very kind. They didn't engage in a lot of dialogue, and they never admitted that this was the reason I got banned. So after some weeks, I wrote back to them and said, look, maybe if you think the title's a little aggressive, I can understand why you might think that. But the reality is, I am only taking people like you and I, Jason, and your listeners, who are Main Street business people, and sharing with them the possibility that perhaps some of the things that the Elons do, some of the things that the Jeff Bezoses, founder of Amazon, are able to do might be of a variation potentially possible with some kind of different thing possible for our listeners, your listeners, to do themselves. And so while they can't do what Elon and Jeff Bezos do, there's other ways of organizing and structuring a business that might allow an owner to come out tax-free. Now, I've got to tell you, it doesn't work every single time. Let me tell you why. In one case, it didn't. I'm working with a business on the West Coast that's worth 6 million, owned by 2 people, and I can definitely structure them for a sale where they'd actually get 7.5 million and exit that business tax-free. But I need time to do that. I can't do it in a couple of weeks. It needs a bit more time. But they don't want that. They're 75 years old. Their wives want them out. They want to spend time for the rest of the time they've got doing the things they'd always promised that they would want to do. So they said, no, we don't want to do that. And so sometimes you can share with somebody how we're going to do it, but they don't want to. Or sometimes because of their circumstance, it may be that I can structure it and suggest this is how it will work for you, but that's not what they want to do. I gave you one reason. There's probably half a dozen popular reasons why people might not want to, adopt a strategy. So it won't always work. So you will then go to tax minimized. Now, the importance for listeners, if you could do a tax-free, is you want to get, if you can sell for 8, you'll still have some fees and costs. But if of the 8, 4 of it is tax, and you could save not all of it, but 3 of it, then you want that money in your bank. You've owned that money. It's your money. Why are other people sticking their dirty, stinky little fingers in the legacy that you've built over decades in many cases? So it's important to try and maximize that piece, which is part of the selling process. What most people get confused with is, and the consequence is, they get confused with, they've sold the business, they have now got the net tax position. So using my 8 million example, that's 4 million in their bank, not 7 or 8. And then they can roll that and do lots of things with it to protect it and minimize the tax going forward. But wouldn't you be better to start with 7 than 4 if you could? And it's just a bit of a secret. Now, I don't want to tell you and your listeners that it's the one thing that's the same thing for every single person. It isn't. You've got to take into account their personal circumstances. And believe you me, I've had some of the strongest, most experienced tax planners and advisors shred me in conversations on this. Every single one of them's come around to my point of view. In fact, some of them have gone back into their businesses and gone, oh my God, we're doing this the wrong way. All I'm doing is disrupting what we traditionally think in the favor and in the attempt to maybe put more money in the owner's pocket, Jason. That's all it is. So the tax piece of it is critical because somebody once said, and I don't know who it is, half of wealth is creating it. The other half of it is keeping it. And by the way, whatever gets done has to be watertight and legal. Nothing dodgy here. Nothing, vaguely blurry here. It's absolutely, and it's not always tax. It's just structuring the business in the right way. And most owners, why would they know that? They're brilliant at doing the thing, not organizing companies. And so I started to really dive into this and find that in many countries, there's things that you can do. So if you can't tax free, you tax minimize. You can always do one or the other. And so the worst case position is just to accept it, roll over, sign the paperwork, and just watch the money disappear. But the other problem and consequence is if your business is only gotten to the point where it's significantly valuable, but not necessarily valuable enough, it's only going to support part of your retirement years. If you're thinking of retiring, then maybe 5 million is not enough for the rest of your retirement. So you've got to increase the value of it before you sell it. And therein lies another another really important strategy, which is how do you increase the value of a business without actually having to go out and spend a load of your own money growing organically the sales, which will take you another 10 years to get to double it anyway, maybe, or without having to buy other companies, which you could do, but that's going to take cash and time and effort. Maybe you could do that in a way where you didn't actually have to spend much money, take a lot of time, get it done, maybe within a year, certainly within 18 months. So if you could do both of these things, you now go from a 5 to a 10, and you got a lot of money. You would have had 2.5. Now you got 9.5.
Yeah.
And so when you bring this stuff together, I realized in writing the book, I wanted to help people as I've really got into researching for the book. And then people started asking me about it. And then I was invited to my first podcast, and then I was invited to some more. Now I believe this is so important. I'm lucky enough to have an agency try and persuade great people like you to have a chat with me. But then on the other side of it, I got invited to speak on stage. And then I was talking about this on stage and then going through see, all of this was in my head. And there's nothing interesting or unique about me. I had to get it out of my head into some kind of thing that people could follow. And the book was the very first step. And then I thought, okay, I need to go a bit deeper because the book tells them what, it doesn't give them how. So then I started to put it into a system which people can follow. So, it's now independent of me with little legs of its own. Where people can, sort of follow that process. And it's just a 3-legged stool. It's grow. I think if you're in the 0 to 5 million range in revenue, you're growing. It's exciting. It's what I call the Ferrari stage of life. You and I like cars, right? You're an American. I'm a European. It's the Ferrari stage of life where you're going to be gusto and busto and it's all guns blazing and it's exciting and you're building the profit, probably spending too much of the profit. And maybe I persuade you to spend a bit less of that, but get it to 5 million, ideally with a 15% EBITDA, but it doesn't have to be. Then you start moving into the next phase, which is everything in the red phase and the Ferrari phase. But now you want to go from 5 million or 10 million to 20, 40, 60, but you're not going to do that by organic anytime soon. That's when you start buying other businesses. I like to call that the Lamborghini phase. I like cars. And so why do I call it that? Because Ferruccio Lamborghini once said, when you're on the way to making it, but you're not quite there, you buy a Ferrari. But when you've made it, you buy a Lamborghini. So this is the making it stage to accelerate exponentially the value of the business by bolting on another one. Because some people may not realize, although many probably do, that you could double the revenue and a profit of a business in a single day if you bought another one and bolted it on the side. Now, all the big corporates do this. Why can't mainstream people like you and me do that? And so that's how you sort of scale that piece. But there's going to come a time when you want to come out of that. Maybe it is retirement, but this actually applies in your 20s and your 30s, 40s, 50s. 60s, 70s, you might want to retire, but you could still go again. And certainly in your 80s, you probably retire. So you get to this green box that I talk about, the green leg of the stool. That's my Bentley phase. Not the modern Bentleys, but the old Bentleys, because the old classics, the Mustangs, the old Cobras, the classic American muscle cars, they go up in value. They stand the test of time. So when you've done the Lamborghini scaling and it's worth it and you exit and you're structuring to make sure you've got the systems, the processes, the procedures and the leadership teams. And I could do a whole podcast just on that. But importantly, you are just structuring for a tax-free exit. This is when you take that money, And if I can influence people, I'll have them go and buy themselves a Bentley so they can just go and look at that old-fashioned Bentley, knowing it's doubling in price every few years. Well, maybe not doubling, but certainly going up in value. And to remind them that when they get bored, they got to come back and go back into the Lamborghini companies that have gotten to that 5 million and give the expertise that they've learned on that journey to those guys and partner up with them to help them get to that same position so that we can disrupt the way that businesses are valued, grown, sold, and realized around the world, because this is a global issue. And no bugger's talking about it, Jason. Lots of people are talking about growth. Lots of people are talking about scale. Some people, but not many, might talk about, well, you might do a tax minimized, which is very important as well. And then retire and do all the cruises. When you bring it all together, and you put it in as a vertical skill stack, a loop that you can go around in your 20s and 30s and 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s and do it yourself and help other people. No one talks about that. I'm the only person that's talking about it that I know of. Somebody's going to come onto the show notes now and say, no, Marc Adams, you're wrong. But bring it all together. No one's talking about it. And it's critically important. It changes the way that we do business. It changes your financial position and wealth. It gives you control and takes and it doesn't stop the governments getting the money, because guess what? You get the cash, you're going to reinvest it in the economy anyway. It's just, it's a thing of beauty, in my opinion, but my opinion doesn't matter. The opinion of your listeners does.
All right, it's time for a quick shout out to the partner who keeps this show running, and that is Dub. Look, every entrepreneur listening knows the fortune is in the follow-up, and generic emails just don't cut it anymore. So with Dub, I can fire off a quick personalized video. I can do a screen share. I can do a webcam, or both in under a minute. And I can drop this link into an email, a text, a LinkedIn message, and Dub shows me exactly who watched it, how long they watched it, and which calls to action they clicked. This type of insight lets me reach out at the perfect moment with a real human touch. So whether you're prospecting, you're onboarding clients, or even inviting podcast guests, Dub turns cold outreach into warm conversations. So if you're ready to see it in action, head over to therealjasonduncan.com/dub, and that's spelled DUBB, therealjasonduncan.com/dub to start your free trial. Plus you get 50% off your first 2 months, and you can look at how I do what I do. So let's get back to Marc. So Marc, valuations. I know we don't know each other, but I am what I consider America's exit coach. I run a mastermind called the Exiter Club. I wrote a book called Exit Without Exiting. So you and I speak in a lot of the same language. So I know that valuations have cooled in 2025. So where are you telling founders to hunt for hidden value as they prepare to get their business ready to exit?
I approach it slightly differently, and I'm relatively confident that this is an area where you might find my views controversial and potentially maybe deviate from your own. And I'm making a big assumption there because we've not discussed this bit. So if you go back to my grow and scale, when you're scaling, you're also acquiring. So a lot of people will say, and I do agree, that if you're going to get a decent exit from a trade buy or a PE or a family office, you need to have a management team. If you as an owner would like to get away from that business sooner rather than later, you need to be in a position where you are no longer the bottleneck of the business and you're not running it. You've got a decent leadership team in play. And you need systems and processes and procedures. Now, in that Bentley box that I spoke to you about when I was talking about tax-free, I wasn't talking about this, but that's where this lives too. So what I say to founders, and here's the controversial bit, is don't worry about that now. Start worrying about that and thinking about and structuring it when you are acquiring these other businesses. Because if you acquire businesses that have got young leaders, 30s, 40s, 50s, these will be the group leaders of your company, and you've just got to make sure you've got the culture right and the blend right of the people that you're hiring. And that's a job in its own right. And those companies, depending on the size, probably have systems, processes, and procedures. So then you can start to blend what that might look like for the overall group and what the system's going to be across the companies. Too many businesses that I've worked with are hung up on acquire and integrate, and that's something I passionately discourage at this stage, because I've been involved in too many integrations that have completely screwed up. And then you end up losing the people. And the kind of integrations I'm talking about are particularly when they're IT centric or IT led. But I recognize it needs to happen. And then the other reason why I kind of say we need to do it, be mindful of it, is because you don't know who your buyer is. And that buyer may have systems, processes, procedures of their own, and they will want to bring those to the group that they're buying. And so I'm mindful of that, but I prepare for it more, or work with owners more on that as it relates to who's buying this. So we'll go out and look particularly for, so if I'm working with a business and we're at that stage and we're prepped, and I've got 3 of them right now, I'm looking for the buyers first. But none of these businesses that I'm working with are on the market, because when they're not on the market, there's scarcity, and I can drag the owner. I shouldn't be saying this on air because somebody's going to realize what I'm doing, but I can drag the owner kicking and screaming metaphorically to a table for an initial dialogue with a potential private equity firm, with a potential family office, with a potential trade buyer, to start seeing if there's a meeting of the minds, and then all of this stuff falls out of the middle. My job then is to secure the best price for the seller. And the way that I'll approach the buyers is I don't charge them any money. I'll make it as frictionless as I can, because I won't have relationships with them because I'm diverse across the industry types that I'm working in. So a good example of this is, and I can't mention the name of the company, but I'll tell you it's in the hospitality sector. It's on the West Coast, and they're big for what they do on the West Coast. They're about 18 million top line, 2.5 million bottom line, decent business, retirement sale. And they're wondering who's going to buy them. They're thinking they'll go on the market with a broker. And I'm saying, don't do that, because with the best will in the world, you go on the market with a broker who incidentally do a good job. Everybody knows you're for sale, and it's a race for the bottom. They're going to try and bid you down. But if I can go and find the buyers, and I happen to know the company secretary for one of the biggest hospitality companies in the world, not to drop any names, but they have the contract for Wimbledon as one of their prestigious contracts that they have around the globe. So what that leads to is an outline of top line, bottom line, really good family-run business, stronghold in what they do, be traded for 30 years. Would that potentially be something that you might find appealing? Yes is the answer. Straight away, I'm plugged into, not that they're a UK-based company. Normally, these are American companies for me, but they plug me straight into their M&A in the States. And that leads to a dialogue where they're very keen to have a conversation. Now, in this case, I went back to the owners of the business and said, right, we're set. We've got some initial dialogue started. This took 3 weeks to make it happen. And they wet themselves because they suddenly realized that they could really sell the business maybe as soon as tomorrow. What were they going to do on that following day? They wouldn't have a job to go to. They'd been doing it for 30 years. So they went, we just want to wait. Now they're coming back around now. They're getting used to that. I didn't expect that result that fast, neither did they. But the thing of this, Jason, is the company that wants to buy them doesn't mind the systems, processes, and procedures that they've got. They're so big that their growth is by acquisitions. They want to run it as an independent business, and they're going to pay 100% of the sticker price, the agreed sale price on day one. And they want to keep some of the younger leaders in to keep that company running and support them from a cultural perspective, and protect the name above the door and protect the legacy, which is amazing and happens quite a lot in a trade buy with a big company like that, because they know the value of what they're buying. Now, sometimes private equity says they're going to do that, but they end up screwing it up. And not to malign private equity companies, because there's some great ones out there as well. And so there's a great of, how if I'd gone in with systems, processes, and procedures there, and it needed to be systemized, let's say on SAP or something like that, it would have been a complete screw up. It would have been, ruined the business, and it might not have been so appealing. So it's, and every one of them is different. I've got another one that's a 10 million EBITDA. They want to get 100 million for that. That's a difficult, and so that business is an amazing business, and it's so processed and in terms of the way it does what it does, it's so automated. And do you have a guess at how many people you think are in that business doing 10 million in EBITDA, 60 million in revenue, worth 100 million? Just pick a number.
In terms of percentage?
No, in terms of how many people do you think a business like that would employ?
Oh, how many employees would they have doing that $10 million EBITDA?
Yeah.
I'd say 200.
15.
Holy moly. That owner is making a mint.
That owner is amazing. I've got another one. They do Oh God, I want to tell you this, but I'm going to get shot if I make. I'm going to have to change the numbers, but keep it really. I'm going to keep it close. I've got to change the numbers because it's too easy to pick it up. This is a 20-person business, and it does north of 60 million in EBIT.
Good grief.
Freaking real. Now, the problem on that is we've raised money on those. I'm going way off topic here. I hope that's okay. But we've raised on that. Oh, I got to tell you about funding in a little bit and how it helps. But we've raised on that for both businesses all the money. But in both cases, what the investors are looking for is the structure in those businesses for the management team, not the systems, the structure in the management team. And the worry they've got is that if 3 of the 15 leave, and in the second case, 20 people at 60 mil in EBIT, if 5 of them leave, the fear is the business is dead. And so you've got 2 years to structure it with the right team of people in place taking over from that before you can actually get that one through due diligence, and it's, you don't expect to come across those, but they're there, my friend, and they're fabulous problems to solve. On the one of them, the 100 million one, they didn't want to work with us actually because we're a small business, and there's 20 of us. And what we started a few years ago as a result of my son has sort of grown legs unbelievably. I just don't know how. I couldn't have planned this. I didn't plan this. This just happened. And so one of the companies didn't really want to work with us because we were a small company. We're really good at what we do, but we haven't got a strong balance sheet compared to a bank. So they said, well, we want to work with a bank that's got a strong balance sheet. And I went, okay, I understand that. And I probably would think about the same thing. But the consequence of that is it's going to cost you 44 million in taxes and fees because we know how to save that for you, or nearly all of it, and they don't and won't. And that kind of put the cat amongst the pigeons. And when you're thinking of maybe if we couldn't save them the 44, we saved them 30, that's a big swing. If you sell for 100 million and you keep an extra 30, it's a very big reason to really get close to an upstart that can help you with some specialist stuff on that. But when I was talking from stage on this, and just going through the trials and tribulations of owners, this is not about me, it's about your audience and can we help any of them? Then there was a couple of people that came to me afterwards and said, we'd really like to help with this. And I didn't know what that meant. It turned out it meant 2 family offices getting behind us to support us with 22 billion of funding. That's not 22 billion in my bank account. I'd need licenses and be a PE for that. That's support. And why did they do that? Because actually the problem that you and I see of companies that you and I might think are worth the sticker price that they want, but the market doesn't agree, means that family offices, private equity firms, and trade buyers all walk past them. And maybe if the price comes down, they might go back and buy them. But the other way of going is increasing the value of them, because it turns out that a private equity firm, a family office, and a corporate buyer doesn't really mind the size of the check. They care about the value that they're getting for that check and the risk mitigation that's in that check that they write. And if those 2 factors are too high, there's not enough, or too low on the value, too high a risk, they won't write the check. But if you can present the business in the right way with the risk mitigated, the examples I gave you with the right structure on the management team, for example, and the right value because the EBITDA is at the right place and you've closed the value gap, then they don't mind the size of the check because they're buying a good business. And good businesses get bought all the time. The trick is to try and get the business in the shape that the buyer wants so that they're going to be comfortable with that. So, we're blessed when we got that support. I've never been to raise money because you don't need to do that with the kind of stuff that I'm doing. And so when I stood up on stage and said, I'm going to need to do this, people laughed at me, and people, seasoned veterans that raise cash said, you'll never do that. You need 10 years of relationships at least, 8 weeks later done. We've got to be doing something right, buddy. And so and when you can, and it's not that family offices or private equity firms go, oh, I've got to help these poor business owners. They want value. And if you can, present it to them in the way across the board with the things they care about where it's value, then they'll write the check because they want to integrate it into a growing entity, into something that gets bigger for them. Am I making sense?
Mark, yes, making perfect sense. And I would love to engage with you a lot longer about this, but unfortunately I'm up against the clock. So we're going to have to hurry through the last couple of questions. This is a really important one. And I asked this of all my guests in 313 episodes. How do you personally define success?
I think success for me, my friend, is the fact that I'm privileged enough with my background and story to even be here. Success for me is waking up every morning and having another day with my family and my kids. Success for me is not worrying about the little stuff where you fight and argue as a family about who didn't do the dishes or who empty or take the trash out. Success for me is I'm blessed and lucky to be in a position where I get to enjoy those happy little faces, as annoying as they can sometimes be, every single day, and I get more life experiences with them. So leading to that, my life changed when I went through cancer and COVID. I was a workaholic before then. I had to find a way to balance things up and get more time with the family. I was working so hard because I wanted them to have a good life that I forgot that the most important thing was to share all the experiences that you can with each other that I very nearly didn't get to have. So I'm embarrassed to admit that, because I should never be in a position where I'm stupid enough to let that happen. But that if you can get that balance and bring in enough cash that you can enjoy those experiences with your loved ones, whatever they are to you, I think that's the greatest success that anybody should and could hope for, in my opinion. But that's probably very
I
heavily
love it.
tainted by my background, buddy.
Well, I love that. So based on that definition, do you consider yourself to be successful?
I'm a work in progress. I was
Yeah.
always a workaholic because of, I've had some failings in my life, and I suffer from not feeling good enough. And so I'm driven by that. I do have to temper that and I don't think I'll ever be, I know when I think that I'll be in a position where I think I'm good enough in terms of what I'm doing. And that's when we have influenced and disrupted enough people and enough conversations to see business value done in a different way and owners get more of what they bloody well deserve, whether they're 20 or 70.
Yeah.
So I'm driven by that, but I have to temper it with the promise that I made to a son and not falling short on that promise ever, who incidentally at now 14, he wants royalties because I talk about him a lot, cheeky little monkey. But success and will be measured by whether I can keep that balance and do enough, but not let it rule my life. Because I've got a few summers left with my kids before they're doing their own thing. But I am blessed that two of them actually want to get involved more with what I'm doing. And to get to walk the path with your kids is probably the greatest gift that somebody could give me as a result of what he started me thinking about, and that pivoted me into this direction. So I hope that's, I don't know whether that's a fair answer either, because no one else is going to go down that path without the background.
No, that's good. Well, Marc, it's been an amazing conversation, and I congratulate you on your success. People want to get in touch with you. Your website is acquisitionsforyou.com, and the 4 is the number 4, acquisitionsforyou.com. And then you can look at Marc Adams, M-A-R-C Adams, on social media and find him at acquisitionsforyou.com. Marc, such a pleasure. I'm very, very honored to know you. Thank you for being on the show today. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, and the honor's mine. It's an absolute privilege to be here, and I'm blessed and thankful that we had the opportunity to spend some time together, and I look forward to doing that again soon.
Well, thank you again for being on the show. All right, you know what time it is. It's time for another edition of JD's Public Service Rants. This is the part of the show where I call out the little things that shouldn't have to be said, but clearly they do. So if you're guilty of this one, consider yourself put on notice. I want to talk to you people who wear headphones or earbuds while walking or jogging in public spaces. Listen, if you're out walking or you're jogging and you have your headphones in and both ears are covered, I need you to do everyone a favor. Keep one ear open, because you're not the star of an action movie. Other people actually exist around you, and they're probably trying to use the same space. So when someone like me or someone else rides up on a bicycle on the left and says, on your left, it would really be great if you actually heard us before we have to swerve off into the grass because you just decided to take a left shimmy forward and almost run us off the road because you can't hear. So please, for safety here, know that this is kind of important. Take at least one earbud out of your stinking ear. Well, that's it for today's JD's Public Service Rant. If you got an idea for a public service rant, send it my way. And remember, don't be that guy. Well, thank you for listening to today's episode of The Root of All Success. I've enjoyed very much having a conversation with Marc Adams. What a great story. What that story of cancer and COVID and his son. What a touching reminder of what's really most important in life and how some of our biggest blessings come in places we don't expect them to show up. So I'm glad that you listened today. Go back and listen to this again. Reach out and talk to Marc at acquisitionsforyou.com. Thank you for listening. Make sure you tune in again next time when I talk with yet another very successful person about his or her journey to success. Until then, as always, I am the real Jason Duncan, and Jesus is King.
Attention business owners.
Attention business owners.
Feeling burnout from running your business? Uncertain if you're nearing burnout? Take our free 10-question business burnout test at businessburnouttest.com to discover where you stand. With just 10 quick questions, you'll learn how to immediately begin making changes to regain freedom and success. Cut your daily operations time in half. Improve your quality of life and prepare your business for your future exit without losing revenue or profit. Visit businessburnouttest.com now and take the test. Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Follow Jason on social media at The Real Jason Duncan. See you again next time here on The Root of All Success.